So moving on. So our next presenter, Mohammad Ravankhah, and he's a Ph.D. candidate at the International Graduate School of Heritage Studies, BTU Cottbus. And his presentation today is Earthquake Disaster Risk Assessment for Cultural World Heritage Sites, the case study of BAM and its cultural landscape in Iran. Okay, thank you, Mohammad.
So, hello everyone. I'm a PhD candidate in a Heritage Studies department at BTU Cottbus, and at the same time I'm working in the Department of Environmental Planning at BTU Cottbus. So my PhD thesis is somehow an interdisciplinary research, and I'm looking at the discipline of disaster risk management and also heritage conservation related disciplines in my PhD thesis. So my PhD concentrating on earthquake disaster risk assessment, as I realized that there is a gap in the risk assessment procedure for cultural heritage sites within the broader disaster risk management. So I'm focusing on the cultural world heritage sites, and my case study is the BAM and its cultural landscape in Iran. So first of all, maybe I can start with a map, a composite map I just generated based on the Global Seismic Hazard Map, UNISDR, and World Heritage Map 2013, and you can see here how many cultural World Heritage sites are located in the areas with high, very high, and medium probability of the earthquake. And for example, based on the statistics from this map, this composite map, you can see like 15% of cultural world heritage sites located in very high and high probability earthquake regions, and like 35% in the moderate. And I can say this moderate level of earthquake is also very dangerous because it can reduce the vulnerability of our cultural heritage site and urban fabric constantly to future earthquakes, floods, and other kinds of natural hazards. So, moving on, I'd like to introduce the main concept of my PhD thesis, which is earthquake disaster risk, because I'm not looking at the earthquake risks and the damage, the direct damage of earthquake, which is traditionally developed, but I'm considering the disaster. And in this diagram, you can see here, I'm applying the knowledge of disaster risk management, and you can see here hazard, when a hazard happens, and hazard is like earthquake here in my PhD thesis. Then when we consider a cultural heritage site and its environment surrounding the cultural heritage site, when hazard happens in a cultural heritage site, we have a disaster considering the different interrelation between the cultural world heritage site, its built environment, the community, and also different secondary hazards. So the disaster is like an emergency situation and crisis I'm looking at, and I'm looking for identifying and analyzing the risks of disaster, not only the physical damage of the primary hazards. Also, as Giovanni mentioned in terms of these military vocabularies, I also continuing with this fact that this is not a hazard, a natural hazard or earthquake with like a massive impact on our cultural heritage site, but the problem is our built environment and our cultural heritage site in terms of physical vulnerability, institutional vulnerability, sociocultural vulnerability of our community. And this kind of different various vulnerability, I can say, can influence the level of disaster and the level of risks. So here we are dealing with a complex system and interrelation between our cultural heritage site and built environment and community. Also, after the earthquake, some kind of secondary hazard like floods, like fires, explosions can happen. We should consider all these secondary hazards. Also during the disaster and after the disaster, during the reconstruction and rehabilitation, a lot of human-induced threats can happen, like after the disaster, like looting, like encroachment, like I can say, the question is that how firefighters, for example, or volunteers can act during emergency response, and they may damage the already collapsed valuable materials, they may damage the authenticity of the building. So all these different risks should be considered when we are looking at disaster risk assessment. So in simple term, I can say the disaster is only begins with earthquake, but the scope of disaster is like a combination of our primary hazards, secondary hazard, human-induced threats, and all risks induced by interrelation between our cultural heritage site and different internal risk factors within our cultural heritage site and external risk factors in the setting of our cultural heritage site and associated community. So this is just an example because my PhD is divided into two parts. The theoretical part is going to develop a methodology of disaster risk assessment, and in the second part, I'm applying this methodology for the case of BAM and its cultural landscape. So this is part of a matrix. For example, when we are looking at an earthquake, a primary hazard of earthquake, we are looking at primary effects of earthquake, like ground shaking, like landslide, liquefaction, but we should also consider the secondary hazards, like flooding, rising groundwater, like fires, explosions, climate-related events after the earthquake. Also, we should look at human-induced threats following the earthquake, can be like man-made hazards, all the different man-made hazards and threats during the emergency response, and also during the reconstruction and rehabilitation and restoration projects. So, the objective of my thesis, as I've already mentioned, very brief. I'm going to develop this integrated disaster risk assessment methodology for the case of BAM and its cultural landscape in Iran. And I'm going to, first of all, develop the methodology disaster risk assessment in an interdisciplinary approach. And then I am going to identify the different types of risks and how, to propose a systematic methodology for assessing the disaster risks for the case of BAM and its cultural landscape, considering its OUV and associated condition of authenticity and integrity. So this is the overall assessment methodology in the theoretical part of my thesis. And you can see how I'm looking at the hazard assessment, looking at the primary, secondary hazard, risk map, hazard probability. Then I have the heritage assessment, looking at the vulnerability assessment. For heritage, looking at the physical, institutional, sociocultural, and different types of vulnerability. Also value assessment, and I'm also looking at existing risk management system at place, like risk preparedness or risk management system at place. So I'm looking at three different major, I can say, pillars here for risk assessment methodology. First of all, hazard, then heritage, and then existing risk management. And here, that would be like technical parts of risk assessment methodology. But by presenting this diagram, I'm aiming to say that how, in terms of disaster resilience, for promoting disaster resilience for cultural World Heritage site, we should consider these different aspects and characteristics of natural hazards, cultural heritage sites, and also the existing disaster risk management system in the existing urban system of, for example, or a regional system, regional planning or urban planning system of an area where our cultural heritage is located. So this is my case study. Bam and cultural landscape located in the southern part of Iran, and you can see here, this is the whole city of Bam, like I can say green point in the desert environment, and this is a very important concept in building this city because it's called a garden city, and you can see how the city is green while it's located in a desert environment. And so the earthquake in 2003 happened in the city of Bam, and the unique story about the case of Bam and its cultural landscape is that immediately after the earthquake in 2003, the Bam and its cultural landscape was inscribed on World Heritage list, I think immediately after a few months, and at the same time, it was placed in the World Heritage Endangered list. And I think 2 years ago, it was removed from the endangered list after some kind of retrofitting measures and restoration projects. You can see here, this is the picture before the earthquake, and it shows the picture in 2008, 5 years after the earthquake. The Bam cultural landscape includes a Bam citadel. You can see here, this is the Bam citadel or Algi Bam, which is like a unique model of Islamic city in Iran, because we have some different elements of a most Islamic historic city in Iran, like bazaar, we have mosque here, we have the government parts, we have the residential parts. At the moment, this citadel is like abandoned, and I think the local population just migrated from the citadel to the city, to different gardens and date palm orchards in the 19th century. So you can see the citadel here, the whole citadel. This is the government parts and the residential parts. And this picture also shows cultural landscape of surrounding of this citadel, this area. And this also very important because there are different architectural elements remaining, and also there is an ancient irrigation system called Kanat. And it's very important because this is a very creative irrigation system. The local population in the city of Bam is just used for irrigating their gardens and their date palm orchards, because the economic situation in the city of Bam is based on these gardens, and that's why this Kanat is very important for the people of the city of Bam. So, and this is my last slide to show that how we should consider different risks and multiple, I can say the multiple risks of a natural hazard like earthquake in the case of Bam and its cultural landscape. So after the earthquake in 2003, we have some damage. We had some damage on architectural parts and structural material of the case of Bam and its cultural landscape. We have damage to the traditional knowledge and techniques, maybe as intangible parts. tangible aspect of our heritage, and also to this model of Islamic city, to this fortified citadel. So beside this structural and physical damage, we had also some economic damage, and how, for example, to the tourism industry, and also that was like an impact on those people who were involved in the tourism industry, linked to the case of BAM and its cultural landscape, to the local population. Also, because of some damage to the irrigation system, this cannot. We had, the local population in the city of BAM had a lot of problems for irrigating their gardens and their orchards, so that was also some economic problems. And in terms of environmental problems, because the canal is not only like an irrigation system, only for irrigating the gardens, but the canal is, I can say, the symbol of the social structure in the city of BAM, because all local population, they just collaborated with each other to maintenance and to repair this canal during the history. So this is also the symbol of socio-cultural aspect in the city of BAM. Also, the canal is like a sustainable water management in the desert environment. And also in terms of the environmental issues, we had different problems in terms of remaining these palm orchards and gardens in the city of BAM, because of a lot of new construction had like impacts on these gardens. In terms of sociocultural, I can say sustainability of the BAM's cultural heritage and also its associated community. I can also mention the religious rituals and ceremonies, because although this citadel is abundant and nowadays it's like archaeological and some remaining structures there, but the local population, they just use this citadel for some kind of religious rituals, for ceremonies for the Persian New Year, and there is a link between this citadel and the local people. So when the local people, they just realized that there is no more security or safety because of the high vulnerability of material in this citadel. So this is also a problem, may reduce the link between our cultural heritage site and the local population. And by showing these different components of disaster resilience, I'm trying to say that in disaster risk assessment methodology, we need to consider all these different components of disaster resilience to follow the sustainable development and reconstruction, in the reconstruction of the BAM, because the cultural heritage site and the restoration project for the cultural heritage site of BAM and BAM should be part of the overall urban planning and urban reconstruction of the whole city. Otherwise, I can say it cannot be a sustainable development, and it cannot contribute in a sustainable development of broader urban system. So, thank you so much.